well. But now we have Craig Lipsit, who, again, as I mentioned earlier, about half an hour ago, Craig is one of those folks who has been around digital health for a long time. He understands life sciences better than anyone out there when it comes to digital health and clinical trials. He's been at the front lines when he led digital health innovation for clinical trials at Pfizer. And now he has a number of different projects that he's engaged in and working to help improve life sciences and clinical trials in the US and abroad. Craig, welcome back to the HITLAB Summit. Thank you for joining us.
Dan, it is always great to be back. And yeah, my work is highly focused on digital applied to clinical trials. I don't fancy myself anywhere near the expert on digital health at large as you and so many in the HITLAB community, but at least when it comes to the clinical trial space, that tends to be where I spend my time.
No, it's really appreciated. And just so for the audience folks that are new to your work and all the good stuff you're doing, if you could just take a minute or two just to talk about what you're doing these days and a little bit about your journey over the last 20 years through life sciences and digital health.
So today I operate as an advisor with pharma, with tech companies, health systems, and the venture community. I teach as an adjunct assistant professor in health informatics at Rutgers University. I work as an advocate, as the vice president at the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research, and continue to advocate for new approaches by serving as the co-chair for the Decentralized Trials Research Alliance, DTRA. DTRA is a nonprofit collaboration with just over 130 organizations working together to ease the global adoption of decentralized research, making research participation more accessible. In my past life, I was over at Pfizer, just downtown from the HITLAB and a little bit west. I was the head of clinical innovation there during my 12 years at Pfizer. And during that time, I had the opportunity to help design and lead the industry's first fully decentralized trial, but also a number of other fantastic opportunities we were able to drive within that organization.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Yeah, again, a really deep and rich experience in the digital health space. And tell us a little bit about from what you saw happening and what you even see happening today. What's changed with clinical trials during the pandemic relative to how they're using digital or not using digital?
I think an interesting takeaway over these last 3 years has been that this question of have clinical trial operators suddenly started to embrace digital and embrace innovation? And in fact, I would say the answer is not that they've embraced innovation. They've done what they've always done, which is avoid risk. Clinical trial operators are inherently risk averse. What changed was the balance in the environment around risk and benefit. All of a sudden, the risk in the external environment exceeded the perceived risk of implementing change, of implementing new innovation, digital or otherwise. As the lockdown prevented research participants from being able to get to sites where they were required to visit in order to get access to investigational product, in order to be studied for data to understand the efficacy and safety of those medicines, all of a sudden the risk in the environment is what drove so much change and adoption. The solutions that study teams had to grab onto to sustain their trials during that time didn't require brand new creative experimentation in the lab. These were solutions that had been available for years, but simply struggled for daylight. They struggled for adoption. And so these approaches, whether remote monitoring, decentralization of trials, strategies for enabling remote oversight of study conduct, all of a sudden saw their moment, their opportunity for daylight, that adoption that really was catalyzed in many ways by the same risk-averse climate that held them back for so long.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's absolutely brilliant. And certainly one of the conversations I used to have with Jeremy Sohn when he was the head of BD&L for digital health at Novartis was we called it the digestion factor. How much innovation can a clinical trials organization, even at big pharma, digest in a single year? There are only so many executives that really have the opportunity to embed a new digital health technology, and they only have so many dollars to do it and so many hours in a week to figure out the logistics and that sort of thing. So that digestion factor, when you have thousands of new technologies and new platforms coming into you as an executive at Pfizer, there's only so much that you can even process in terms of the due diligence, much less actually purchase and then implement. So that's a lot to think about. And again, is that something that you saw happening at Pfizer when you were there?
We are certainly in a period of an incredible amount of digestion having to happen at really an unprecedented pace, because we put so many new dishes on the menu over the last 2 years. We've filled up our plates just like we did last Thursday, right? And now all of a sudden we have to normalize and stabilize with these approaches. We got past the incredible inertia, the tremendous challenge, the initial barrier for even considering many of these new approaches. We got past that over the last 2 years, understanding regulation and compliance and privacy and technical partners that we may need. And now what we've seen over the course of 2022 has been most large organizations normalizing some baseline set of decentralized tools in their organizations. It's digestion, but to the point that Jeremy has made in the past, digestion is hard, but it's been really remarkable what we've seen over this past year as organizations have adjusted their SOPs and training. They've modified protocol template language. They've made sure that there's not anything incumbent in their legacy processes that specifically precludes doing things outside of a clinic, whether home, pharmacy, or elsewhere. And they've started to identify those new partners that they need to be able to embrace these approaches at the enterprise level. Now, there's I'd say a core set, what I'd consider DCT 1.0, that most organizations are implementing and adopting now. But there's still that edge of innovation that I don't think we've lost sight of. These core areas, Stan, like use of video and e-consent and electronic diaries, some basic use of maybe some connected diagnostics, but a lot of process innovation. How do we get drug supplied to the patient at home? How can we acquire images and collect specimens closer to the patient's home, or at times even in the patient's home? I think that all of these have started to see their kind of sustainability pathways in most large organizations, all while these edges of innovation continue to be experimented. I completely agree with the point that digestion is a big challenge to run concurrently, but it has been remarkable to see. Just 3 weeks ago now, the DTRA held their annual meeting, and we had 5 different major pharma companies come to the stage and share their models for how they are driving scale and adoption across their enterprise. Boehringer, Sanofi, Pfizer, BMS, Otsuka, each taking the stage and sharing those. And we're keeping those videos online at dtra.org for folks that may be interested.
That's fantastic. And so we saw a lot of press, and there were a lot of meetings about decentralized clinical trials. And a lot of people have been saying that the tree, it kind of bent over, it swung over during the pandemic, and then it's swinging back up, where in terms of the actual spending for decentralized trials is not there. And we're hearing it from our tech companies. They're saying that they were really hoping that this would be the event that would kick up, kind of like with telemedicine. We saw, telemedicine also saw a tremendous amount of runway and talk, and it was up because people needed to use it or they didn't get revenue. Unlike decentralized clinical trials, life science companies were still getting revenue, they were still doing trials. So this idea of the tree bending but then coming back to midline is it seems to be what most people are saying. Is that what you're seeing as well, or are you seeing vast amounts of spending taking place on new technologies because decentralized trials are absolutely the wave of the future, and there's 100% commitment by the top 25 manufacturers to actually start using these remote technologies and these digital technologies to platform decentralized clinical trials today and not over the next 10 years? Or is it something where decentralized trials it's going to be a slow burn? It's going to take 10 years. It's kind of like EDC for clinical trials technologies, where everyone was talking about electronic data capture in the 1990s. You saw some companies like Metadata and FaceForward really explode. But at the end of the day, by 2005, 2006, 10 years after the dot-com boom, clinical trials were still, 30% or really 70% analog and only 30% digital. Is that the same thing we're going to see in terms of DCT adoption over the next 10 years?
I do think it is going to look different. I think that the pandemic is a remarkable catalyzing factor that we never would have anticipated around the change curve. But what that doesn't mean is that as our pandemic recedes, that all of a sudden we have this unprecedented level of spend and adoption. I think there are a couple of points to your question here, Stan. First is around our definitions. We have discordance in the community right now where there are some vendors and operators that may use their own niche definition of DCT that suits their operating model that may look different from how pharma companies are adopting and driving scale and adoption. Remember, there's this DCT 1.0 set of tools that they're really rallying around. And when we point to many of these large pharma, their commitment there is substantial and largely unprecedented. But even separate from the definitions, which we've worked to try and normalize, we've stood up a glossary, but we still see, this, I guess, Dan, what I would say is there's a level of, in my mind, intent behind whether something is really a decentralized approach or not. You can use an electronic informed consent that's written to require the patient to go to the clinic in order to complete it. You can use a paper consent where you're mailing it to the person at home. In that case, the paper consent's decentralized and your e-consent really isn't. You're just using a cool digital technology that still was written in a way that required a patient to come to the clinic. And so there is this aspect of intent, which I think we might lose sight of. But I think the real crux of the question that you're raising is, while leaders in these companies are committing, there is a change management obstacle that everyone has to manage and anticipate. We've managed change in pharma companies before. We've managed change in CROs and other large organizations. We know it isn't free, cheap, or easy. Change takes effort, it takes commitment, and unfortunately, it does take some time. So we do have leaders that are committing to these. We have organizations that are being built to support these approaches. We are even seeing budget being more consistently allocated, but we still have to make sure our study teams are coming along with that change. One other note on change, Stan, that I'd put out is we've seen the regulators incredibly forthright and progressive from many regions around these approaches. A few weeks ago, we had folks from EMA, from FDA, from the Israeli Ministry of Health, all coming to the stage and talking about their commitment. But even in regulatory authorities, those are also complex organizations. And they likewise are still managing change to make sure their review divisions, their inspectors are all keeping up with this progress. So we have great support from above. We're still and we have lots of teams that are adopting, but why aren't we seeing this incredible spend? I think because we're still managing change within our organizations to bring those study teams along.
Yeah, and that's a really good, and I think an important insight that a lot of people tend to miss, which is the cultural transformation is critical in order to carry out the technological transformation. And just buying technology and throwing it into someone's department saying, hey, guess what? I got this new thing, go do it. We saw that happen. And, it was a big AI machine tool. It was a big AI, multi-billion-dollar kind of spend. And, a lot of people got stuck with having to implement AI for $50 or $150 million in their life science company. And now they're sitting in the basement with a red stapler because it didn't work. And the board's not going to take the fall, and the C-suite's not going to take the fall. So ultimately it's like Joe, the IT manager, who had to implement the AI tool that didn't work, and it's his fault. So he got demoted or whatever. And that's always part of what happens, is that cultural transformation is so extensive for these sorts of technologies that it is something that it's about a 2 or 3 year implementation process if it's done correctly.
If it's done correctly, we need people to have aligned incentives. We need things baked into their goals. They need to have organizational support, which means both budget as well as expert resources that can help them to navigate this. But perhaps the best thing that we can do as a community by working together is to keep demonstrating and identifying the examples of real world experiences. It's something we're certainly actively working on as a community at DTRA and another forum, because That's what people need to see. They need to see that the person down the hall from them that did a trial like this last year is still there, and that their work was celebrated and recognized, and not diminished as something that was viewed as risky and had a negative impact on their overall study conduct.
It's fantastic. Greg, well, once again, thank you for joining us today. Always great seeing you, and hoping you have a great holidays, great rest of the year, and we'll talk to you in the new year. Take care.
Thanks for letting me join today, Stan. Good luck with the rest of the meeting.
Bye-bye. All right. So, he is a very busy person. Craig is, he's teaching, he's researching, he's writing, he's really helping folks understand where digital clinical trials are moving through the decentralized model, and really appreciate his time today.